Amcor Flexible. Jerry's just turned on the recording. So I worked with those guys for a number of years. I then did 2 years as a global key account director for a family-run German business. Lived and worked in Germany for a couple of years. Now, during that time, really, this is where I really identified that my industry, the packaging industry, really had an issue. It was almost impossible to quote a large, complex global key account across multiple sites. And it was largely due to the fact our costing methodology was very lacking. And as I've come to learn over the last 11 years of running Benchmark, it's a problem that runs across all of the packaging industry, and actually not just the packaging industry. So we also see this in other industries as well. Jerry and I have been collaborating now for, I don't know, about 6 months, I think, and it's been a real eye-opener when Jerry and I have really exchanged war stories as to what he's seen and experienced over his time in the industry. And it seems to be a problem really in a variety of ways. So our solution to that was to develop a software package. And in recent years, we've extended that to carbon footprint modeling as well. And I think for those on the call who are cost engineers, you're going to find it really, really interesting to learn the parallels between carbon footprint modeling and cost modeling. They are almost the same thing. It's just the inputs are different. So what I'm going to do in today's session is I just want it to be an educational piece, really. So there's a lot of new terms that are being shared to do with carbon footprint modeling, and some of these terms we're having to get familiar with. What do we do with this data? What does it mean? What is important? What is not? It's a bit of a minefield of new acronyms that we're all trying to understand. So I'd just like to shine a light on that, really, and try and hopefully help you out and give you a bit of a library of information that should be useful for you going forward. I will talk a little bit about cost modeling as well, and some of the pitfalls and common mistakes. So I think probably for the guys on this call, you're unlikely to be making them. So I will skip through those. That said, hopefully you find something useful and interesting in there. But the software package we've got today, really we regard as sort of a best in class, particularly for the flexible packaging or the packaging industry generally. So corrugates, cartons, labels, and injection molded items as well. Yeah, let's get into it. So here are some of our sponsors. And this is where we come to us. You'll have to excuse me, I'm running a second screen over here. So if you see me looking left a little bit, that's why I'm doing that. So first, let's cover the topic of carbon footprint modeling, and let's cover some of the common definitions that we hear. So first of all, you might have heard the term LCA. It's a life cycle assessment. It's a systemic analysis of a potential environmental impact or products for a service during its entire life cycle. Okay. CO2e. Now this, for me, is an amazing measure. So if you think, as Gary said at the beginning of the call, you know, I think we're all growing quite considerably in our concern over the effect we're all having on our planet. Now, the issue that we've got and the complexity about life cycle assessment is that we're affecting our planet in such a variety of ways. It becomes very difficult to measure. You talk about the gases, the different variety of gases that might be going into the environment, the damage that you might see to the water table, depending on the activity that you're analysing, and different emissions and a whole variety of other things that go into our impact on the environment. What the world of life cycle assessment has come up with is CO2e. Now, we all know CO2, carbon dioxide, from the periodic table. The E at the end is equivalence. So all impacts to the environment are then standardized down to one benchmarkable number, which is CO2e. So when you start carbon footprint modeling, if you start carbon footprint modeling, instead of a cost per kilo or a cost per unit, which you might otherwise be working towards in cost modeling, you will be working towards CO2e if you start carbon footprint modeling. Circular economy. So this is a systemic approach to economic development designed to benefit business, society, and the environment. In contrast, in contrast to the take, make, waste linear model, the circular economy is regenerative by design and aims to gradually decouple growth from consumption of the finite resources. The obvious example of this would be recycling, you know, where you might have heard closed loop as one of the terms around recycling, where the specific bottle that you put out into the market as a brand owner actually comes back to you in waste, such that you can regrind that down and use it back again through your extruders. Would be a perfect example. And net zero, here's another term that we've heard quite a bit of. Now, net zero, sometimes people think means zero carbon impact to the environment. It doesn't necessarily mean that. From the Carbon Trust, it is to achieve a scale of value chain emission reduction consistent with the depth of abatement, achieved in pathways that limit warming to less than 1.5 degrees with no or limited overshoot. Okay, so if we can reduce our carbon emissions to a point where the global warming is not increasing to above 1.5 degrees, and we're just over 1 degree at the moment, then that would be considered a sort of definition to carbon net zero. And also, the second part of the definition is to neutralize the impact of any source of residential emissions that remain unfeasible to be eliminated by permanently removing an equivalent amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide. So definitions continued. There's also something called greenwashing. So we've seen this in the UK. So in the UK, there was a whole Netflix series a Netflix documentary on this, which was called Seaspiracy. I'm not sure if it made popularity in the US, but we had a sustainable fisheries logo that went on a lot of packs of fish in the supermarket. So us, the consumer, you know, we would be buying these packs of fish, thinking that because it's got an FSC logo on it, it must have been fished in a sustainable way. Actually, when the guy that put together the documentary really got into the detail, it turns out that the company issuing the logos was essentially making its revenue from the industry that was needing the logo itself. So there is a huge conflict of interest. And actually, when you start looking further down the road, well, a lot of the fishing companies that were achieving the FSC logo, Sustainable Fishing logo, actually they weren't sustainable at all. So it was a huge greenwashing issue. So the point there is that one of the, well, we'll come on to the reason why that's important a bit later, but greenwashing is critical. It's affecting share price and it's affecting a number of other things. So for companies to make claims that they are or are not sustainable is really important that they're very clear, because what's already been proposed in the UK is a green claims code. And if you break these rules, the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK can and will prosecute. Second to this, there's another phrase that you might or might not have heard of to do with carbon footprint modeling, and this is scope 1, 2, and 3. Now, this is basically the level of detail that your carbon footprint analysis goes to. Scope 1 is just emissions from the which are the direct emissions from the company owned and controlled resources. So if we talk about car manufacturing, then we would be talking about the emissions that the car assembly line factory is emitting directly itself. That's scope 1, that's it. Nothing to do with the supply chain in and outside that building. It's only to do with stuff inside the building. Scope 2 emissions are direct emissions from generated from the purchased energy. So this is where a car factory would buy in its energy. At scope 2 level, we're interested to know how that energy was produced. Okay, so was it produced a lot from nuclear, from wind, from sustainable sources, from coal? And then what's the carbon impact then based on the electricity that comes in? Now, scope 3 is what everybody works to. So scope 1 and 2 have very, very limited applications. Scope 3 is the one that we really need to focus on. And our carbon footprint modelers benchmark is fully centered around. So this is all direct and indirect emissions. So this is the emissions to do with the products that you're buying in. all the way from how they are sourced from natural resources, all the way through to their production, your in use, energy used, and any waste that you generate, all the way through to its end of life. Okay. So if you do choose to carbon footprint model, get to know what scope 3 really means and make sure that you're aligning yourself with this framework. So data. The next thing to talk about is with carbon footprint modeling, no different to cost modeling, you're building up the different building blocks of your carbon footprint model. And each one of those elements, if we talk about a car again, I think that's something we can all probably relate to. Each one of the elements that go into build a car has a carbon footprint associated with it. So now comes the issue, where do we get the data from to say, right, so per kilo of injection molded polypropylene for the dashboard or for some of the molded parts that go in the car, where do we get the carbon footprint data from to feed into our models in order to calculate the ultimate carbon footprint and, you know, carbon impact? EcoInvent is the answer to that. It's the best source of carbon footprint data. We subscribe as a business. It's not the cheapest, I have to be honest, but all life cycle assessors, consultant life cycle assessors, use that as their main source of information. The data is brilliant. I have to say, it still has lots of holes. Not every material, every product is represented in there, but I have to say it's quite a good database. And also, the data inside is broken down into a number of ways. So if you look here for the packaging industry, we use cutoff data, which is otherwise saying what's the 100-year impact for this product in the world. So over 100 years, if something, a product ends up in landfill, over 100 years, how much carbon dioxide, or CO2e, I should say, will be expelled into the atmosphere. Okay, some products, the 35-year assessment is appropriate. So the first thing you need to do with the data from EcoInvent is just make sure you understand what your carbon footprint modeling and understand what is the degradation rate of the product at its end of life. If it's more than 35 years, or you think there are some elements in there that are 35 years, you have to use the 100-year assessment, okay? Because it's generally accepted that over 100 years, most things would have decomposed. The International Energy Agency is another great source of data, and it is, most governments provide data to it. You can really get some great data from the IEA to do with how each country is generating their energy, and therefore, if you even want to look at state by state in the United States, you know, what would be the carbon impact per kilowatt hour of energy used, for example. That data would all be stored there. So all you need to do then within your carbon footprint assessment is say, well, how many minutes and hours do I need to use my manufacturing machines for, in the same way you would do for cost modeling. But then you're applying this CO2e number, which you'd get from the International Energy Agency and EcoInvent. Okay. And then for the direct energy usage, so how much energy is specifically used. So if you look at these sources of data, we can find out what the materials are, the carbon impact for the materials that are used in our process. We can get that from EcoInvent. Combination of EcoInvent and International Energy Agency, we know per machine hour how much energy or CO2e will be used. Now, for the direct energy usage, so specifically that business, that specific machine in that factory, that unfortunately is primary research. So ideally, you need to go into the business, go into the factory and understand what their energy usage figures are. That said, in the same way that we do should cost modeling, some of us on the call, where you can take generally accepted rates, if you know what the energy usages are for the common machines in a particular industry, you can apply those, but you need to be a little bit careful how you use the results. Just in the same way, you can't say a should cost is a fixed price. It's not a fixed price, it's just what it should cost. So just need to be a little bit careful how you use that data. Excuse me. The key here, and the absolute key with carbon footprint modeling, is consistency of data. Don't use the 35-year assessment in some elements of your assessment and then use the 100-year assessment for others. If you're using 100 years, use 100 years. Don't go to EcoInvent for some of your data and then maybe Garby or CimaPro or one of these other data sources for another one. The detailed life cycle assessment data that's in some of these databases are sometimes captured in a slightly different way, and consistency in carbon modeling is paramount if you want to have a number that you can really publish externally and it stand up to scrutiny. So if we've talked about some of the key definitions and we've talked about some of the data, where to get your data from to do a carbon footprint assessment. So the next thing to talk about is how do we actually carry out a life cycle assessment? So I got these from a life cycle training course that I went on, and it had like a really nice bullet point list in this training. So first of all, set out the goals of the system and define the system, clearly define the systems and functions, set out what is in scope in your definition and boundary. So if we took packaging or a car, you might say, well, I only really want to do scope 2 analysis. I want to work out exactly how much CO2e is going in from the beginning of the production line in the factory to the end, because we want to see what we can do to impact the carbon, emissions that we emit within our own process. So, you know, maybe in future, you might be looking further downstream at your suppliers. Okay. You might also only be doing cradle to gate. So you're not going to grave, you're not considering the end of life of the product at this stage. So the reason that's critical, of course, is you need to make sure the data points that you pick from EcoInvent are consistent with the boundaries of the study that you want to produce. Data collection, as we talked about in the previous slide, you would get from your associated data sources. And then modeling, so linking the data sets together to understand the overall picture and make a methodological choices. So this is where, again, if we use the car metaphor or the car example, you know, if you've got a variety of different elements that go to produce an engine and then ultimately a car at the end, you need to be able to link those together exactly the same as a cost modeling routine, cost modeling would have. You need to do exactly the same here in carbon footprint modeling as well. So then you need to run the model, of course, check your outputs, and you then need to do an impact assessment. So take the inventory data and group the information to generate the impact data sets, such as global warming potential. So there is an ISO standard for how this data should be presented. Honestly speaking, the benchmark system can analyze and report the data in that level. But to tell the truth, I think what most people are looking for, most businesses are looking for, is not 20 data points to tell the same story that one data point can tell, which is the ultimate CO2e impact, which tells you everything you need to know about the global warming potential. So the impact assessment can easily be summarized down as a CO2e impact. Interpretation, if you were doing a proper LCA study, and it's almost like a dissertation, if you can remember that from your university days, you really need to write your report up. Now, honestly speaking, if you're using a software package like Benchmark, you're not writing a full report at the end. I mean, a lot of stuff is inferred in the background and part of the setup of the system, and actually all you're looking at is the end result. But if you are going to do a proper life cycle assessment, then yeah, you should really do that. The final point here, and they did make a big story about this when I was on my LCA training course, getting a third-party critical review is very important. This is also very critical to the Competition and Markets Authority and guidance around carbon footprint modeling and anti-greenwashing. So with this, it's very common, as we see today in the market, that people are marking their own homework. So what this means is a company will say, well, we've developed our own carbon footprint calculator, and we're now issuing our own carbon footprint numbers to the market and telling our customers how great we are. Your issue with that is you're marking your own homework. You wouldn't publish numbers that allowed a perception of your business or your brand to be negative. And this obvious conflict of interests means that, you know, the consumers out there that might be looking at this information would start questioning it. So if you are going to put this information out into the public domain, my strongest advice would be to get it peer reviewed, get it third-party critically reviewed to make sure you've had no mistakes, and also put that on your public communication as well. So we've talked a few times about this already. How can we avoid green washing? So first of all, looking at the Green Claims Code in the UK, claims must be truthful and accurate, must be clear and unambiguous, not omit or hide any information, and compare good or services in a fair and meaningful way. Claims must be substantiated. Part of that, of course, comes from third-party review, and need to consider the full life cycle of the product as best as you can. So it would be easy, for example, for a car manufacturer to say, actually, our carbon impact is really, really minimal, because most of the carbon impact is actually in extruding and molding some of the huge parts that they need to buy, and the engine and everything else. Actually, what the assembly line is physically doing, I mean, I've not done an assessment myself before, but I dare say on a car assembly line is probably quite minimal. It's 90–80% of that carbon footprint of that finished car on the road is probably coming from all the constituent parts, not the assembly line, which is the responsibility of the manufacturer. So we need to be careful. We can't therefore go around saying cars are close to net zero in terms of their carbon impact. We obviously know in common sense that that's just not true. So then the Netherlands, in Europe, they came up with some rules of thumb and honest claims. So you can see those there. Now, to my knowledge, I don't think the US has declared anything themselves in terms of their claims or their guidance around this area. But I would look closely for that. I would imagine at a certain point that will come. So one of the nice things that you can do, once you cost modelers actually adapt your models and maybe turn your attentions to some carbon footprint modeling, you can see here, it's a really nice thing to be able to do to reflect cost versus carbon. And, sometimes you might see that actually the cheapest solution is not always the most environmentally friendly, and least of which, if you are selling sustainable products, it's often the case that those can be slightly more expensive. And look, if that's the case, the really nice communication you can make to your clients or your businesses, if you're trying to justify it internally, is to say that yes, something is 10–15% more expensive, which is obviously something difficult to justify. But if you can say, well, look, we're halving or even more our carbon footprint as a result of this small on cost, that's a much better story to go back to your business with. So we move on. I'm a little bit conscious of time. So these are the reasons why to carry out an LCA. That top bullet point is probably the most critical. It's really interesting for me. A lot of people that have their pensions managed by fund managers, when they really dictate their risk levels that they want on their pension fund, it is very, very common now for people to be saying, I will only want my money, my pension money, to be invested in companies who have a green agenda, a sustainability agenda. So the big companies, ESG goals, environmental social governance goals, are absolutely critical, because if they don't have a good and well substantiated ESG story, the big fund managers of the pension companies can't place the pension funds that they manage into a whole host of different companies. So all companies, all of the big ones, are now making ESG claims, ESG goals, and trying as best they can to be sustainable. And they're not doing that. Well, they are doing that because they want to protect the planet, of course. But I think what's underlying that's forced this drive that all of the big companies have got these now is very much to do with protecting share value. Other than that, I guess you can read the rest of them here in terms of 80% of people believe that business without supply chain sustainability and wider ESG standards will struggle to access capital. Again, this is this investment issue, and less green companies would have to make investment to make and meet new government regulations and potential tax on carbon. That, by the way, is the latest theory in the UK. We already have a plastic packaging tax in the UK, which is linked to post-consumer recycled content. We are all expecting within the next 3 years a carbon footprint tax to come out at a certain point. And actually, the team at Benchmark are already kind of advising the government how that could work if they do go ahead with it. So if we move on, Second part of the presentation, we're going to talk about cost modeling pitfalls. So a lot of this stuff you guys might already know, and I apologize if this is stuff that you're very familiar with, but I will go through it. The team at Benchmark, what we do with our cost model is we will go to a customer's business, we will assess what they're doing today, and then we'll try and match our system to theirs to make sure when they change their costing methodology over to our system, that transition is smooth. You know, they're not looking at a new system with new numbers, but the process by doing what we do, we have seen hundreds of Excel spreadsheets, different software packages that people have used in history. And these are some of the things that we see. Large global organizations using Excel spreadsheets to create prices. I mean, an Excel spreadsheet that does a cost model has got all of the company's private information, and Excel spreadsheets are very easy to send around. So we've got to be careful of security there. We see really poor maintenance. People are not updating their data, their cost structures in their systems for you know, the annual costs and inflationary costs. Labor costs obviously are going up a lot at the moment. Not updated in line with raw material cost movements. So in the packaging industry in particular, paper and plastic, aluminium as well has gone up a hell of a lot in the last 18 months. You need to make sure that you've got a good routine for keeping data maintained in the system. And also, if it's an Excel spreadsheet, whatever costing solution you're using, it's good to have a solution that you know the developers or the developer and that person or organization is going to be there in the next 5, 10, 15 years. It causes a huge issue when your business evolves. You need that costing model adapted, and the guy's no longer there in order to make that adjustment. So you end up having to work outside the system. Duplicate copies or different methodologies used at different sites. So if any of you are working in a multi-site organization, it is so common for us to see within the same company, as an organization grows through acquisition, that all of those legacy routines are maintained. You know, if you are part of a group, you should work as a group. You know, the customer communication should be consistent. Then run and maintained by one individual and not accessible to all commercially responsible colleagues. So again, a good software package can really help different levels of access and different people. No governance or approvals procedure. It's amazing for me. I come from a world of global key account management. Price was always a huge topic and treated very seriously. In a lot of companies, it's just not. You know, a guy can come up with a price in his office and it can find its way to a customer within 24 hours and nobody's approved that price. What if that guy's made a mistake? He's human. It's easy. So, you know, make sure you've got a good governance procedure around approvals. May not be able to calculate large-scale tenders. So what I've seen in my industry, and speaking to Jerry with all of his experience, is happening in many other industries. A lot of prices have been going up, not just for raw materials in the last couple of years, but also for energy, for labor, and a number of other elements as well. Now, with that, buyers are looking for more transparency in their price. They're not looking just to track and index raw materials anymore. They're looking for further detail. Now, with that added complexity, it puts a huge amount of pressure on commercial teams. Make sure your system is scalable, can run these large complex tenders, and can give the cost transparency that you need to offer to your clients or do for yourself in should cost modeling. Make sure that it represents your profit and loss routine down to an EBIT level. It's quite critical, particularly if it's a pricing system. And make sure that if you have developed a system, you know, some of the guys that we see that have developed sometimes really nice Excel spreadsheets, they've never had them checked by anybody else. Now, I have to say, I'm pretty good at this stuff, but I have made several mistakes. But I work within a team, and my team tests my work and we test each other's. It's a software package, so it gets stress tested all the time. And, you know, in the end, all of this, if you don't have a good costing and pricing model, it's not trusted by your business. So the next thing, if you are working in a manufacturing environment, manufacturing machines don't work in linear ways. They don't, you press the button and it immediately runs at 200 meters a minute. Often you find that these machines will run at different speeds because of different reasons. So make sure that where you capture your performance, your speed of your machines or your waste of your machines, try and make sure you've got a method by which to build in complexity into that. So what if it's running this spec, that spec? What if it's a small order quantity or large order quantity? On the left-hand side, you can see an example that we came up with for this particular problem, where we can have speed and waste curves that are variable by a whole range of different factors. Palletization, storage and delivery costs, uniquely designed to ensure both flexibility and accuracy. So with this side, there's a huge amount of mathematical logic that goes in around pack and the supply chain generally, you know, the packaging, storage and delivery. Often this is a corner cut by industries. It's in some markets not a very big cost, so it's easy to not take it seriously. In other markets it can be very expensive. All I would say is try and get it down to a SKU level, try and get it down to a really good level of detail. Ensure data definitions are consistent across the group to ensure price consistency at the customer. Kind of already talked about this on the last slide. And then ease of data update and accountability of data maintenance. This point about data maintenance is amazing, really. If you can do automatic uploads via some sort of Excel spreadsheet, or even better, have like an EDI interchange where, you know, the legacy ERP system like SAP is automatically updating the, you know, the should cost data or the pricing data. But this whole point about accountability of maintenance is absolutely critical. We just see it too many times that data is not very well maintained. Excuse me. Then you talk about large tenders. So we talked about this a little bit already. Make sure your system is has an ease of use for estimating, such that new colleagues can adapt to it quickly and the risk of errors can be reduced. Again, it's something that we see a lot. The guy that built the spreadsheet, who's now left the business, he was perfect at it. But now the new guy comes in, and I don't know if you've ever picked up somebody else's spreadsheet before, and it's a large complex one. It's just difficult to use. So make sure before people leave the business, things are very, very well documented. Even better, try and use a software package where you can, because you know that software company will always be there to help guide and support. Ensure customized templates, remove repetitive work of filling out custom pricing templates. So if you're always downloading should cost data and then needing to, you know, complete a management report or a report that needs to go to the business, this should be automated. So again, I'm conscious of my audience here today. I'm sure you guys have probably got that quite well organized. Ensuring that the inquiries process is linked to estimating. So if you are looking at a pricing tool as part of your cost modeling, make sure that the inquiries process is linked. So you're not like getting some sales guy to fill out an Excel spreadsheet for an inquiry, and then this has to go over to the pricing department for pricing. You know, software can solve this. I'd highly recommend that you do that. And then campaign run benefits. Again, I work in a manufacturing industry, so anybody else on the call that is as well. Campaign running is where you group similar designs or items together to reduce the burden on setup and the setup cost ultimately. There are no real systems in the packaging industry that really calculate that accurately. So that came as a big surprise to me. Being able to calculate campaigns accurately was my key secret weapon to winning and losing big tenders. And being able to do this accurately in certain industries with machines with huge setup times and huge setup waste, it can really make a big difference. So if you have got campaign running, I would question the functionality just to make sure you're 100% happy with it. If you don't, have a think about it. Get in touch with Jerry or somebody else in the Society of Cost Engineers, and we'll see what we can do to guide and help them. Then with any software package, one other thing is, with cost modeling generally, you're dealing with very, very confidential information. If it's should cost modeling, maybe less confidential because it's a model that's built with publicly available information. If it's a pricing tool, then there is a lot of very there's a lot of very private data. Make sure that, you know, and you can't really do this with an Excel spreadsheet in a really nice way. That is, you know, limit the visibility of confidential data. Ensure duplication of data is minimized within the process. Escalation and approval process coupled with a target margin setting as well to ensure target margins are achieved for every estimate, and ensure the cost model is protected. However, if it's an Excel spreadsheet, well, I would suggest that, you know, if it's on a shared drive, it's in a shared drive location where very limited people have access to it. And then this final point is really where we start taking cost estimating, and really where the team at Benchmark has got to. We're more of a commercial excellence platform now. So we're not just calculating an accurate price, we're trying to do a lot more with that. So these are some of the things that we've really driven our business forward with. Full inquiry facility at a SKU level, linking price and CO2e together, because one of our mantras is to make sure if you quote a price, you can also get a carbon footprint as well. Again, it's a really critical point, this actually, that for any of you cost engineers on the call, if you do go down the road of carbon footprint modeling, if you can build it as an extension to your should cost models, then that's really critical, because a lot of the time, if you want to go down this road, you have to buy a new software package. It needs a whole set of separate maintenance. Like 80–90% of the data, well, 80% of the data you need for carbon footprint modeling is in your cost model. It's all your machine performance data and what pallet do you use and all of that, what materials are you using and all that type of stuff. So, make the carbon footprint model needs all that information as well. So, really important there if you can link the two systems. Multi-level and safe, secure system, supported professionally. This is the issue with people leaving the organization. Low cost subscription model means that it can be kept up to date with regulations. Maintenance of data needs to be easy. Access levels to manage workflows, accurately represent every SKU at an EBIT level, and then able to calculate thousands of SKUs in a minute, because a lot of the businesses that we work for and represent, all of us on the call here today, they're not one-man bands, they're not simple operations, they're very large, complex outfits. And then, as you can see here, there are some other things here as well. One of the things I'm pretty passionate about, we've delivered once or twice already, pre and post calculation checks. So an estimating package is a pre-calc estimating system. Your manufacturing post-calc information is what you've actually achieved. You should always be comparing the two, and if you can automate this benchmarking process, is really powerful information. Because if any assumptions are wrong in your estimating package or your should cost model, being able to link those two data sets can be really, really powerful, particularly in a pricing tool. And then the other thing that I would suggest as well is market intel. A lot of these systems that we develop, a lot of information comes our way. What we always find, and what is very traditional in organizations, the senior guys, the sales directors, the global key account directors, these guys have got all the interesting information because all of the sales guys and the teams feed information up to them. Now, what you can do is register that in the cost model, because all of that is to do with good pricing and costing. So if you can somehow represent that market intel and take your should cost models from just being data processing and should cost modeling, and then start using it to drive some sort of commercial excellence, if that data is available when you're doing your cost assessments, it's hugely powerful in order to drive the accuracy of the work that you're producing. That is just about me, to be honest with you. I'm hoping the carbon footprint side was interesting. I don't know how big a topic it is. I'd love one of you to engage in a few questions, actually. I'd love to understand how big a topic it is in North America today. And the cost modeling side, well, as I said, I hope that was useful and it was pitched at the right level. I imagine a lot of those things you guys are aware of and even, have fully managed. But, at least I can only hope that there was one or two interesting slides there for you. So right. Thank you very much, guys. And I'll pass back to Gary.
Yeah, no, thank you. Unfortunately, the Zoom has not been enabled for questions, but I'm going to make a few comments, and I did have some questions that were sent to me in advance. Just a couple of comments. First, excellent, not only interesting, but relevant. I do a lot of presentations. People say, well, that was interesting. How about relevant and informative? I suggest everyone get a pencil and paper. I'm going to give a couple of things to write down. One is Liam's email address, which is not on there. So it's Liam Barbary at benchmark-consulting.co.uk. Did I say that correctly, Liam?
Yes, you did. Yeah, you did. .co.uk. Yeah, that's fine. I'll see if I can flash my email address up on the screen. But yeah.
While you're doing that, I did a little bit of research before your presentation. I saw very interesting articles. This is about the greenwashing, and I suggest people do a search just on these terms: companies, climate targets. The full sentence is companies' climate targets are not what they claim to be. So there is controversy here about how divulging organizations are going to be about this stuff. I also did find an organization. I'm going to give you a website that I think is worth going to their website and investigating. It's called Capitals Coalition. I'm going to spell it out: www.capitals coalition, coalition.org, or maybe just do a search on it and perhaps contact. I'm sure they have leadership people that you could do the contact us to get more information from them. So, Liam, prior to the presentation in the last few days, I did get someone say, can you make sure you ask Liam a couple of questions? One of them was, what is the biggest lesson learned for organizations attempting to do carbon footprint reporting?
I think the biggest lesson learned is repeatability and consistency in the data. The absolute truth of it is, to get a specific life cycle assessment done on something simple like this pen that I've got in my hand that won't show because of the background, is it costs about £20,000, £25,000, and that's just for that one item there. Your issue is, if you want to then do it next year because the background data has changed, then, you know, what we've learned is that where in the past I think it was okay to spend that money for a one-off number because we were doing a one-off activity, this is something that we need to monitor and you know, be able to repeat on a regular basis. And for that, you know, consultants are great for one-off activities, but you need a good software package. So begin with the end in mind is what I would say. You know, it needs to be consistent, it needs to be repeatable, and it needs to be easy. So to make it easy, build it in with your existing systems. This is where I said having it linked to, say, your cost model is perfect, because you've got 80% of the data already in there. You just need to adapt it then to do your cost modeling at the end, which, by the way, that small adaptation took us 2 years in benchmark, so it's not that small sometimes. So but yeah, that's, I would say, the biggest lesson is making it consistent, making it repeatable.
Another one of the questions, very basic: how to get started? How do we get started?
What I would do is I'd first of all look for a software package that is appropriate for you in your industries, wherever you're working. I think depending on the size and complexity of your organization, you might want to engage either with a professional lifecycle assessor on retainer, so he can guide you through your setup phase. But the target should be that you get it set up. It will take some time and cost at the beginning. And then once it's set up again, it should be repeatable and easy for, let's say, somebody who's not fully lifecycle trained to then be able to run on a daily basis and report those numbers for their business. So, you know, look for a software package and then look for a qualified lifecycle assessor to help you with that setup, is what I would say. And if that's not a good enough answer, please reach out to Jerry or myself, and then we can maybe point you in the right direction.
You know what? In my experience, because having been a consultant for 40 years, I used a technique kind of from the automotive industry called rapid prototyping. In the IT world, it's called rapid application development, RAD. And the method is start just with a one-day workshop with 5, 6, or 7 knowledgeable people in a room and construct a high-level model, even if it's in Excel, doesn't have to be in the software. It's sort of like starting to get data requirements definition. You're starting to say, what will this look like? Even though it's high, simple, not accurate, no useful data. And then my technique is bring in managers, line managers, executives the next day, show them what this team has done, like a debriefing, very engaging because they're modeling their own company. I do this with activity-based costing systems, balanced scorecard. And the light bulbs go on with everybody. Oh, I get it. I see how that's going to work. And then you can do iterative remodeling, switch over, start extracting data from the ERP systems as you described. So I'm a big, I call it crawl, walk, run, fly, soar. So you start with a crawl.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. All I would say is that when you start researching this yourself, as we did, I mean, we were lucky. We had the University of Nottingham, one of the UK's best universities. They supported us and provided a PhD student to help guide us from the beginning. Because our journey was a success, and that's the route that we took, is why I would highly recommend that. It really is a minefield of new acronyms and new information and new understanding and new databases that you really need to understand to carbon footprint model. Having that guidance on retainer is something that would be really useful. I think, and in the end, I have to say, as a cost modeler myself, it's been quite an easy transition of learning to go from cost modeling to carbon footprint modeling, to really be a ISO accredited cost modeler, life cycle assessor. Okay, that's something different. You really need to go and do some studying for that, but just have a good understanding and be able to produce an accurate carbon footprint assessment. I think, being a cost modeler, a cost engineer, is a really, really good starting point, I have to say, because it's exactly the same mindset that you need to be able to do both.
Well, thank you. This is so coincidental. 10 years ago, I write a lot of articles, and one was called People, Planet, and People, Profits, and the Planet. 10 years ago in a business magazine. My frustration is not much progress. And I really hope, that our descendants, my grandsons' sons, are going to live in a better world, and that we got to get on the ball and get moving here. So unless you have any closing remarks, and then I'm going to basically let people log off a few minutes earlier than the 60 minutes.
Yeah, no, nothing from my side. A common question when we run these webinars is, will the presentation be made available? So I guess, Jerry, if you've got any comments on that, you've obviously got the attendees' email addresses, I assume. I'd be happy for it to be distributed, Jerry, if you're able to circulate that.
Yeah, so what the plan is that we will edit the video, and it will be posted on the Society of Cost Engineers webpage, and potentially on Liam's page and Gary's as well.
Okay.
All right. Well, everybody, thanks for attending. Have a great weekend, and let's save our planet Earth. Take care. Bye.
Thank you very much. Have a good weekend, everybody.